Hello, everybody. How are you doing, guys? I hope that you will enjoy my presentation, and I will do my best to share my experience. And I hope that you can take something useful and interesting for your teams. That's my goal. The name of my presentation: In Search of Domain-Driven Design in the World of Microservices. And as you can understand, we'll be talking about DDD and microservices. My name is Anwar Nurmakanov. I'm a lead software engineer from EPAM. My current role in my current project is solution architect. And I guess that's it, what you need to know about me. So, everybody dreams about new projects. Everybody wants to have something new where they can apply all of the best practices, ideas, and approaches and avoid all of the mistakes they had in their past projects. So we got this lucky chance more than 2 years ago. I started working on one greenfield project, and my customer actually is one of the biggest insurance companies in Europe. They provide a lot of services for their clients. They have a lot of portals, they have a lot of products, and they have been long enough on the market. It's why our mission was to improve their user experience and provide new set of solutions to increase sales, of course. And some people wanted to use microservices since the beginning. And they wanted to use microservices because everybody does it. Actually, if you Google something about microservices, you will find a lot of articles, you will find a lot of YouTube videos where people trying to explain how it's cool to use microservices. And sometimes I get this feeling that everyone got crazy about microservices. Everyone wants to use microservices everywhere, in any project. For most of them, it's even some kind of goal. I even know some people who have pretty nice working solutions. They don't have any problems with delivery, deployment, infrastructure, and still they want to migrate to microservices architecture. I call those people IT hipsters. And for me, IT hipsters are those who want to be cool and better than everybody else. They want to come up to their friends and say, okay, look at me. I have pretty nice things in my portfolio, in my CV. I'm working with Kafka. I'm using event-driven architecture. And it's normal because we're human beings. We want to get some respect from our friends and colleagues. There is another thing. Some people look up at big companies like Netflix. Netflix actually is one of the pioneers in this field. They have been using microservices, since the beginning, and they publish a lot of articles, a lot of books about microservices. I can list some other companies, but that's not my goal. I just want to say every time when you want to use something, because everybody does it, just ask yourself a couple of questions. Do you have the same number of users like those companies do? Do you have the same number of requests like those companies do? And what about some other quality attributes? Yeah, I say that some people wanted to use microservices, but we had another group of people who knew that microservices can bring additional complexity. And I was one of those guys who knew that, yeah, it's better to double check everything and make sure that we really need microservices. One of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein saying that, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. Me and my teammates agreed to, take this approach. It was a very short introduction, and I want to tell you, if you want to use microservices, do it right. You should have a strategy in your mind how to organize and apply microservices architecture for your domain. So let's jump to my story, to my journey. When I started working with my development teams, I had 2 development teams. I was the first guy who was responsible for architecture. And all of the guys had a lot of questions about our architecture. What kind of things will be used, how it will be working, what kind of patterns, and especially they had a lot of questions about domain-driven design. They wanted to know why should we use domain-driven design, because we used to work without DDD and everything was perfect. We didn't have any problems with that. Actually, I could recommend them to read all of the books about domain-driven design, and my personal recommendation to read them from left to the right. But there is a thing. We didn't have time for that. We had to start delivering user stories and new requirements as soon as possible for our business stakeholders and for our business representatives. It's why I decided to give them a very short introduction about domain-driven design, and I started from domain definition. Domain is a part of our reality. It can be transportation, it can be insurance, it can be biology, whatever. And we, as a development team, must create a solution for this domain, which is called domain model. Domain model is some kind of abstraction created to manage and tackle complexity of our domain. One of my favorite examples about domain model and domain, Leopard project. Let's say that we have some people, business people, who want to build Leopard project, and they have some requirements for this project. For example, Leopard must be able to run, jump, swim, it can use claws, it can bite, and so forth, so on. If our development team knew what is Leopard and how it looks, they will build something useful and expected by our business stakeholders. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. Sometimes development teams don't have enough knowledge and understanding of domain and domain concepts, and they can build something like this. Or like this. Do you think that our business representatives will be happy? No, because that's not what they expected to have in the end. If we just list all of the requirements for our animal, it must be able to run, swim, jump, it can bite, but both solutions can do this. Do you agree with me? And it will be always the case if our business representatives and technical experts don't talk to each other. Okay, I was able to convince some people from my development teams, and some of them still had questions. Why should we use domain-driven design? Because we can apply some best practices from Agile world, like sprint review, early feedback, and so forth, so on. I decided to provide a bit more information about domain-driven design, and I started from ubiquitous language. Do you know a story of the Tower of Babel? Just raise your hand if you know the story. Okay, cool. I don't want to retell the whole story. I will just briefly explain some, maybe the most important details about this legend. So people who lived in Babel wanted to build the biggest tower in the world. And they had been punished by gods. They started speaking in different languages and stopped understanding each other. It's why their project failed. So let's try to think if the same can happen in software development process. Just imagine how many different roles we have in our projects. We have QA guys, we have developers, we have Scrum Masters, solution architects. And what if all of them speak in different languages? Can you deliver your project in the end? I think no. Another point was about business, because developers are those people who like creating something exciting and interesting for them. They don't focus on business stuff. They would like to have something, like cutting edge and modern their CVs. And I know many developers who will do so if they have a chance. But the main goal of every project is to have something useful for our business, for our product owners and other stakeholders. Another good thing from domain-driven design is that developers don't have to invent anything new in their source code, because mostly naming convention, structure convention is available out of the box. It's about tactical design. And some people who wanted to use microservices, I had an answer for them as well. I told them that domain-driven design helps to find boundaries. It's another story. I will come back to this part a bit later. And here I just want to continue telling you how I worked with my team to influence them to start using domain-driven design. Actually, they had a lot of questions about DDD. I don't want to give you all of them. I will just provide three, the most, like interesting from my perspective. The first one, how to use DDD if we don't have experience of using domain-driven design. Do you remember that we didn't have time because we had to deliver user stories as soon as possible, and not everybody was experienced in DDD at this moment. It's why me and my management agreed to organize a training for my development teams. And I want to tell you that one of the biggest mistakes people make in their projects, they start using domain-driven design without enough knowledge in a team. It's very important to have this knowledge to be sure that everybody understands at least basic concepts of domain-driven design. And here's basic list of topics we covered. We started from introduction. I also touched strategic design, tactical design, and in the end, we also reviewed event sourcing in CQRS. Next question was, okay, how to build ubiquitous language? And since I was the architect, I was, like one of the guys who had some experience of using domain-driven design. And I explained them that it's very important to start working on domain model as soon as possible. And we did it. Usually, it's very difficult to find time slots in, like in schedule of our business stakeholders. They're very busy guys. They have a lot of other meetings. They have some internal conversation with their clients. And it was almost impossible. But we explained that, guys, without your involvement, we cannot make it through. We cannot achieve this result. So yeah, we had this domain model review session once a week. And very first thing we did, we started working on our user requirements. And I do believe that you agree with me that very first entry point for all of the developers are user requirements and user stories. It's why it's crucial to have ubiquitous language there as well. And here's one example we used in our project. It's the name of one user story. And have a look at green parts. Everything is coming from ubiquitous language. We should start forcing our development teams to use definitions and words from our domain model and ubiquitous language. Okay, no matter what kind of test you have in your project, it can be very good testing pyramid, it can be ugly testing pyramid. It's very important to use ubiquitous language there as well. You cannot say that test is something else, it's not source code. It's the same type of artifacts. Have a look at green parts. Everything is coming from ubiquitous language again. And yeah, we should use it in any type of test. Unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and so far so on. So yeah, it's also very important to use ubiquitous language in your architecture diagrams. Let's say that you use C4 model. It means that if you try to find a name for your containers, components, classes, and contexts, you should build everything on top of your ubiquitous language. And you cannot invent new words, new definitions, because it's very convenient for you. And finally, everything must be in source code. Here's the same example. We have broker class, which has one method discard policies. Do you recognize what we are doing here? Do you understand what we're doing here? The same thing like we had in previous slides. And the last question, maybe the most easiest one, how to apply everything in source code. My development teams, they had pretty good understanding of tactical design. They knew what is domain service, they knew what is aggregate, what is entity. But it doesn't work if you don't have ubiquitous language in your source code. And my first recommendation was to use tactical design together with ubiquitous language. They should work together. Otherwise, it will never work. Okay, so it was some stuff about my way of working with my teams. And here I want to share some thoughts about domain-driven design and architecture. So if you commit using domain-driven design, you will get a lot of benefits in addition to ubiquitous language, in addition to some guidance in source code. And the most important and the most crucial thing we got from domain-driven design was in impact on our architecture. And every architect must have a vision of his components and models in his architecture. And this vision will be some sort of guidance for developers who will be working on their user stories and will be delivering something useful for business. I know some people who make such decisions, some kind of components and models based on their intuition. But it's not how everything works in software architecture process. You must be able to explain every decision to all of your stakeholders. We also dream about ideal architecture. We would like to have ideal microservices architecture. We want to be proud. And it's not always true. Sometimes you might have Frankenstein microservices architecture. It will be working, it will be running, it will be, like even looking pretty good, but it can fail, it can broken from time to time. So it's better to have a good strategy for your microservices architecture and how to split everything in your domain. So the very first question you should ask yourself when you start working on microservice architecture: how can we know the size of our microservices? Actually, there are some good ideas like lines of code, number of endpoints, let's say REST endpoints, one entity per microservice, one aggregate per microservice, and one process per microservice. Do you see something that can be used in microservice architecture? Just raise your hand if you see something that can be applied. Okay, I don't want to tell you which one is good, because I will tell you about another approach. But if you choose the wrong strategy, you might have too many microservices or enormous amount of microservices. I also named this problem microservice to micro. When you have to spend a lot of time to understand one business process because you must open 10 or 20 microservices to understand how policy submission process is working in our functionality. Since my development team was very experienced in tactical design, they wanted to propose something from this part of DDD. They told me, okay, let's use aggregates, let's use entities to split our domain and to have some microservices in the beginning. Actually, nothing from my perspective can be applied in the beginning. And since I was the guy who proposed to use DDD, I was the guy who was responsible for architecture, I knew that domain-driven design is more than just tactical design. It's more than source code. And if you have a look at this diagram, you will find a lot of things like ubiquitous language, subdomains, bounded context, and I knew that something can be taken from this part. So the next part of my presentation will be about bounded context, and I will try to explain how we use bounded context to organize our microservices. I do believe that you know basic concepts from DDD, what is tactical design, what is strategic design, what is bounded context. Still, I wanna show this slide and explain one more time that bounded context is something that protects our ubiquitous language. And if we have more than 2 ubiquitous languages in our domain, it means that we have more than one bounded context. Actually, here what we had in our domain, we had 4 bounded contexts. The first one, personal information management context, insurance context, accounts context, financial context, and all of them had different stakeholders, different delivery requirements, different domain languages, and even different teams. It's why after some conversation and discussions, me and my development teams, we realized, okay, why cannot we create one service per bounded context? For example, everything related to insurance will be placed in insurance service. Everything about accounts will be in account service. Everything about medical stuff will be in medical service. And when something works well, people cannot stop using this idea. They would like to continue. The same happened in my development team. They wanted to continue creating microservices because it's cool. They got some pretty nice impression about microservices that it, like makes their life a bit easier. But we should have some reasons to continue. And I will provide some of them. For example, if you want to scale some part of your domain, it makes sense to start thinking about more microservices. Or you would like to add additional development team to your project. Or for example, you would like to outsource some part of your domain. Or you want to have better availability for your like some specific parts. Okay, what else domain-driven design can offer except bounded context? Again, entities, value objects, service repositories, factories, aggregates. And from my point of view, aggregate is something that can be applied if we want to continue working with microservices and if we did everything with bounded context. Here's one example from my project. Just have a look. We have two aggregates. The first one is insured person, and the second one is medical information. How everything works in my business. Every time when we create a new policy, we should collect basic information about our insured person. It can be address information, it can be information about his company, it can be some other fields. And only sometime after, it can be in one day, it can be in 1 week, in 2 weeks, he must visit a doctor. He must visit some people from medical center. And they will collect medical information and submit to our system. Do you think that we can just have one aggregate, insured person, and medical information will be just one of the entities of this aggregate? Just raise your hand if you think that it's a good idea. Okay. I can explain why it's pretty bad idea because of transactional boundaries. Do you remember my story that basic information about insured person can be submitted independently from any other information, from medical information? We have 2 days difference, we have 1 week difference, and everything can be managed, like independently. It's why we have 2 different transactional boundaries in our domain model. So we decided, okay, if we have more than one aggregate in our bounded context, why cannot we split our services into several more services just to, like putting aggregates in every service? And in our domain, we have several flows: documents flow, policies flow, payments flow, and agents flow. Actually, what we could do, we could extract all of those aggregates into independent microservices, but our idea was to make it when it's needed. And my question, do we need microservices? Is it real good and cool stuff? That's what you want to have in the beginning? Actually, the best answer, it depends. Because you should have some reasons for microservices, you should have some reasons for maybe some other approaches. And I like those 2 quotes. The first one from architect Clippy, and the second one from Simon Brown. And what they're saying is that if you cannot build well-structured monoliths, most probably microservices will never help you. You will build the same thing, but with microservices. It's why many people prefer to start with monolith first strategy in their minds. And actually, that's what we decided to do in my team as well. We wanted to have one monolith service per bounded context. And I can explain why, because microservices are complex. They they bring additional complexity to our ecosystem. You will have to deal with service discovery, containers management, monitoring, config management, and failure recovery. And it's a very short list. Actually, there are a lot of tools which help to deal with all of these problems. But still, you will have to manage, you will have to organize, you will have to train your team to make it right. Okay, one of the strategies we used in my project, we decided, okay, why cannot we keep boundaries inside our monolith services? And if we started working with one monolith since the beginning, we could have all of the bounded context in one big application service. Whenever time comes to split, for example, we have some requirements to provide better availability for some specific parts, or would like to share it with another team, we can split it. We can extract some components, some modules from our monolith services. Actually, we hope that our monolith services will be well structured, well prepared, and we will be able to split it when we want. Actually, it's not always the case because people cannot keep dependencies in their services. They have a lot of internal connections and they don't have real boundaries between those components. Okay, I want to tell you, I won't even share some good stuff, how we used boundaries to keep components independent from each other in our monolith service. You know, everyone dreams about ideal architecture. Do you? Just raise your hand. Okay, everybody wants to have something cool and nice in the end, and we want to be proud about our teams, our projects, and architecture. Nobody wants to have a big ball of mud. It's very difficult to maintain. We'll have a lot of troubles to fix, like some internal problems. It's why I do like this book from Robert Martin, which is called Clean Architecture. He has 2 other books, and I recommend maybe to read this one if you have a lot of work as an architect. And what he's saying in those books, your architecture must be easy to read and understand every detail of your project. Just have a look at this diagram. Can you tell me what we have here? We have 2 bedrooms, we have 1 kitchen, we have 1 bathroom, we have stairs. Is it a library? Is it an office? No. It's an apartment. The same must be applied in our software, in our services, in our architecture. And if we assume that our bounded context or aggregates are just models or components, why cannot we organize everything in this way? It's a real example from my project. I just copied and removed everything else. Have a look at the list of packages. We have accountancy, we have insurance, we have medical packages. Is it easy for you to understand what kind of business we're trying to solve here? Okay, cool. What we did, we just represented all of the bounded context as a group of components. And the same idea works for aggregates. Let's say that in insurance bounded context, we have several aggregates like brokers, documents, payments, and policies. Will it be easy for you or maybe for your friends to understand, again, what kind of things we have in our insurance bounded context? We also applied entity control boundary approach. It's one of my favorite patterns to organize packages and structure in my projects. And it's a pretty simple one. What you have boundaries, and another component can be internal component, that can be external component. If they want to send or maybe receive messages from your component, they must do it from boundaries, through the boundaries. We also have entity package, and this package is about our domain model. We have aggregates, events, what else? Commons, value objects, domain services, and so forth, so on. We also have control layer, which is needed to connect boundary layer to entity layer. And here my example from my project, how we organized everything. We have boundary package. Here we have REST services, messaging services endpoints. It can be SOAP web services, whatever. Control is just application layer, and entity contains all of the things from our technical design. I also want to say that one of my favorite ways to organize components is hexagonal architecture. I don't want to explain everything about this pattern because it's pretty big one and it might take time. Actually, I will need another session to explain everything about hexagonal architecture. It's very similar to entity control boundary. What we have here, we have the main layer in the center, and it must be protected by application layer. And everything around is just adapters and ports. If we want, for example, to store our information in one database, we should use adapters and ports for that. The same for integration things. REST services, SOAP services, whatever. If we assume that every model is a hexagon and models can interact through boundaries, we might have something like that. And honestly, it's one of the diagrams from my project because I wanted to explain to my development teams how to apply hexagons, how they will be interacting and integrating through boundaries. You can see that we have 4 components, policies, brokers, documents, and another one. Doesn't matter right now. You know, if we want to keep our components independent from each other, we should apply some best practices. If we extracted some aggregates and created independent microservices for them, will it be good in the beginning if we have one monolith to have very strong references between aggregates? And here is an example. Guys, my examples, Java examples, and I'm pretty sure that the same thing can be working in any other platform like .NET, JavaScript. I just want to show you that we have insured person aggregate, and it holds a reference to medical information aggregate. So every time when we want to modify insured person aggregate, we can change medical information aggregate as well, just by mistake. We don't want it, but it might happen. So there are some cons of direct references. It's the first one, tight coupling, transaction boundaries evoke, changes to modify second aggregate when the first is changed, and it will be very difficult to split our monolith services into several more microservices when we need it. And here, one example from DDD community, and they propose completely different strategy. They would like us to use identifiers. We have the same insured person aggregate and it holds just an ID and nothing else. Can we change medical information if we, for example, updated a name of insured person? No, because we don't have a reference to real object, we cannot modify it, and it will never happen. So I showed you how we organized boundaries in our monolith services. And you know, if you did everything well, if you organized your services, if you have well-structured packages, it will be much easier to split everything in future. I'm not saying that it will be easy work. Still, you will have to make some modifications for sure, but it's much easier if you thought about future refactoring. And here I want to, I want to show you how we did the splitting. For example, we had one service in the beginning for insurance bounded context, and we extracted the following microservices from this bounded context: broker service, document service, payment service, and policy service. All of them will have their code base, their Spring Boot structure, and so far, so on. One of my favorite patterns about this type of refactoring, which is called Strangler pattern. Do you know this pattern? Yeah, and this diagram from Microsoft, actually what they are telling, what they want to show us in this diagram. Every time when we want to migrate from legacy architecture to new architecture, we can put some kind of facade in front of our services. And every time when we make modifications, everything will be hidden behind this facade. Our end users, our external services will never notice that we have some kind of modifications behind the scene. And finally, when we complete the work, we can remove this facade. Nowadays, in microservice architecture, we have a lot of patterns, and one of my favorite, API gateway. And that's what we did in our insurance bounded context. We had one API gateway, Spring Boot API gateway. We had one service for payments, documents, brokers, and policies. And when we got additional requirements, additional quality attributes to extract policy services, we did it. And for our web applications, for our third-party services, it was like, okay, nothing was changed. It's still the same. Sometime after, we extracted another service, document service, and you can continue doing this thing until you achieve your final goal to have as many microservices as you want. Actually, yeah, we just extracted one package, and since we prepared everything in advance, we did some kind of, like think in advance, like preparation of identifiers. We didn't have strong references, so it was quite easy for us. Now we have 5 microservices for insurance-bounded context. We have about 5 microservices for personal information context. And I can continue, but I guess that you understand my point. That it's much easier to extract microservices when you prepared your code base for that. Actually, what we did, we just changed channels. And for example, if you have one monolith service, what you can use what your platform provides. Since we use Java and Spring Boot, we had to use some internal communication. Actually, it's just a call from one class to another. And here's an example, Java example, good one. We have policy submit service from one aggregate, from one component, which calls broker search service from another component. And I can show you another example. Here, we try to call broker repository. Which one, in your point of view, better? Yeah, I already have it in my title, but still. This one will be very difficult to modify because policy submit service has to know a lot of things about broker repository, about broker structure. Some internal details will be placed there in policy submit service. And if I open the previous slide, we don't have any details about broker repository. We don't know some hidden details, what kind of methods called behind broker search service. Everything is encapsulated. So when we extract our services, actually what we just do, we change channels. We change one type, which is calls from one class to another to some other protocols. It can be REST calls, it can be gRPC, it can be messaging stuff, whatever. It's up to you to choose. Okay, that's how it will look after our modification. We have policy submit service, and it doesn't call broker search service anymore because it has a reference to another service, broker client. And broker client is just a way to call REST service from another component. Actually, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. My presentation was created for those who already have some experience of using domain-driven design and who know what is tactical and strategic design. And I just wanted to show some best practices and ideas you can apply in your future projects, maybe in your current projects. And I hope that everything I showed will help you to, make the right decision. Don't try to use microservices because everybody does it. Don't try to apply one architecture because, let's say, Netflix did it. And if you still have some visions that it might be used sometime after, prepare your architecture, prepare your source code for future refactoring. Just keep it in mind. I just want to ask you to rate today's session. I hope that it was useful and interesting. And if you have any questions, you can find me in LinkedIn, in Twitter. I'm always open to any type of conversation. Just ask me and I will try to help you. I'm ready for that. Thank you, guys. And yeah, it's Q&A session. Just a minute.
That was a great talk. Thank you. And earlier you talked about the entity control boundary. Is that an abstract interface or is it an anti-corruption layer?
No, it's not anti-corruption layer. Anti-corruption. Actually, we had some anti-corruption layers, and for us it was the list of API gateways because we wanted to protect our bounded context from legacy application. And boundary is just like REST services, gRPC services, SOAP web services, and stuff like that. We can use it like anti-corruption layer, but still it will be in our source code. And developers will have to deal with it. They will have to open, they will have to understand what's going on there. It's why my personal recommendation is to keep everything out of our microservices. You can create API gateways for that. Actually, that's what we did in my team.
Anybody else?
Hi, great talk. My question is, how did you manage reporting? For example, one CSV that needs information from the broker and the pods. I don't know if it's your case.
Actually, I don't remember that we had anything like that. I can just tell you that we had some sort of migration from legacy application to new set of services, and we had to migrate data from one database to another. By some reasons, our client could use only CSV files for that, and they provided some archives with those CSV files, and we created some kind of importing tool to parse this CSV file, to extract data, and send everything back to our services. And for us, at the same time, it's also some kind of anti-corruption layer because we wanted to protect our bounded context from external influence. And we didn't want legacy application to, like force some decisions in our source code.
Got it. And it's a shared database or one database for microservices in our case?
Yeah, it's another story, but in our project we have one database per microservice because, again, it's another story. And my personal point of view, if developers and development teams have a chance to integrate through database, they will do so. They will create some common tables, they will create some common views for that, and it will be very difficult to migrate to like independent databases. You can use one database but different schemes to to increase costs. It's one of the strategies.
Anybody else? We have time for maybe one or two more questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, Anwar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys.